4. Okay, what I'll do is I'll start out with giving a short introduction of the early years of KHTML, what happened in the beginning, how the whole project came into existence, and then after that George will take over, talk a little bit about the more recent things, collaboration with Apple and the WebKit team, and show some demos. Oops, that one. Okay, well, where did it all started out? Well, the first attempt was actually when the KDE project was founded, and that was in October 96. So now 10 years ago, pretty much. And KDE was supposed to be, desktop environment for Linux. That was what it all started out with. And clearly a desktop environment needed a file manager. It was called KFM at the time, the KDE file manager. And what people wanted were simple web browsing capabilities in there. So the first attempt was to write a library called KHTML the KDE HTML widget. That's how it was called. And I mean, as you might remember, the web in these days was easy. I mean, HTML 3.2 was still the standard. There was more or less nobody using any scripting or any other things on web pages. So they were simple and was sort of easy to say, okay, we can do that. We can render most web pages. So what that thing implemented was HTML 3.2 mostly. Well, it had P10s, so it disconnected for every image. Frames were working, but it didn't have anything like the more modern things like DOM, support CSS, support scripting, or you name it. And developers of that early stuff were Torben Weiss and Matthias Jones mostly. Martin Jones. Some other people joined in later on, but that's were the people. So that was a little bit before I started with it. And, well, pretty soon it became clear that this is not going to cut it. I mean, this is a long email I just took out. That was an email sent from Martin Jones and Torben Weiss in November 1997, where they realized that the current design is not going to be good enough. It's not worth looking through all of it. But what you can see here, some of the things they said, what we really need is HTML 4.0. We need CSS, level 1 and level 2, JavaScript, Java support, secure sessions, and plugins. All of these were not there in the old design. And they came up that, we have a need here. If we want to have a browser engine that works and that's compatible, this is something we need, because already in 97, people were starting to use some of these features. There wasn't too many web pages using them, but some of them had this as an issue. So that was November 97. I answered to that one, said, oh, maybe I can help you out a little bit, but I won't have a whole lot of time because I'm working on my PhD and I'll be pretty busy there. And, what happened then? Well, nothing actually for a few months. Because we created a mailing list, we had 5 emails exchanged on that, and nobody really did any work, nothing happened. So we were stuck with the same engine. Another thing that happened then is in March 98, Mozilla released its source code. So Netscape released the source to Mozilla, and the first thing we got as a question after one day was if anybody already looked at it. And, well, Martin said, yeah, we looked at it, but we haven't really done anything with it. But he'll release a KDE version of Netscape tomorrow. And he was kidding there, and that was all it ever happened. We got the funny thing is, we got these sort of questions rather regularly, every 3 months by the latest. Somebody was asking, why don't you guys just use Mozilla, even later on? And there was a simple answer to it, actually, or several. One of them was, it's not fun. I mean, we were working on an HTML engine, and we wanted to do the work ourselves and wanted to have the fun of doing it. Just, trying to port Mozilla over to KDE was sort of like feeling like, nah, that's not what we want to do. The other one was that we actually, in the early years, we didn't see whether Mozilla was going anywhere. It took a long time for the project to pick up any speed. Nobody was really sort of certain how it looked and when they would have something that is releasable. So, a little bit later, half a year later, in November 98, then KHTML came into existence. It was basically a copy of the old KHTML library. Baldo Bastian did that. he also was one of the early guys working on that stuff. And we did some refactorings there, added Unicode support, moving over to the Qt version 2, which was basically preparing for KDE 2, but there were still no substantial improvements. So the real work when KHTML actually started, and when what you nowadays know as KHTML or WebKit, is actually in May 99. And there we had I came to realize that we had two choices to do. Either we do a significant effort to move KHTML forward and move it over to comply with web standards, have a DOM implementation, have CSS support in there, or we will have to use Mozilla at some point if we want to have something that works for people. What we saw at that time was scripting was most urgent. People started using JavaScript a lot more in web pages, and a lot of web pages started not working anymore because they were relying on JavaScript. So I started some research in May of that year, and first of all looked at the DOM specification implementation. And I started doing an implementation, doing sort of some of the APIs, generate them from the IDL, the DOM description. Did a split between the API and the implementation to make things easier to maintain and in the longer term. And what we did at that time was to have a DOM tree inside the implementation, and that one held all the data and it knew how to render itself onto the screen. That was actually a significant step forward. So here you see in August, that was the first time I actually put that code into a public CVS repository in the KDEs, into a branch of KDE CVS called KHTML to DOM at that point. And the cool thing about it was that, once I've done that, actually pretty fast, I got some other people interested in it. Just a few weeks later, 3 weeks later, a guy called Antti Koivisto came and he joined me in doing work on that. He had a patch, and he became one of the most active contributors to KHTML over the next years later on. And then in October, finally, there was a KDE meeting. Preparing for the KDE 2 release, a KDE meeting was also called KDE 2. It was the second meeting of the KDE community. And that was where I presented my work to the community. And what was cool was that all the pieces were falling together there in this meeting, because there was another guy, Richard Moore. He had done some work on Java and trying to find out how to call Java show Java applets embedded in a C++ application, in a KDE application. And we found out that it was really easy to add that Java support to the work I had done. So after a day, we could show Java applets running inside the web browser. And at the same time, also a person, Harry Porton, came up and said, "Oh, by the way, I have developed this JavaScript library." And he had it there, and we looked at it and said, "Yes, cool, that's exactly what we need." So we added it as well. And he worked on it for 2 days, trying to do some first bindings to the DOM. And we could show also there, after 1 or 2 days, we could show the first simple JavaScripts running inside the browser, doing some simple manipulation, simple changes to the DOM. And that was very, very encouraging, and we moved all of the stuff then over to the main development branch of KDE. So that was when actually I'd say the modern KHTML came really into existence. Nowadays, see. After that, there was a few months where we did bug fixing, and we attracted one new contributor, made significant one, Dirk Müller, who's actually one of the 3 guys who really did most of the work. That was sort of, myself, Antti and Dirk Müller. We 3, I think in the early days, did most of the work on the engine. So KHTML was actually up to sort of, let's say, 2001, developed mostly by 3 people. Another thing we came to realize then in the winter of that year is that the DOM alone is not enough. We looked at the CSS specification, and originally I thought we could just add that on top of what we had, the design. But then if you look at what CSS provides, you can completely change the behavior of any element by just changing its display type from inline to block, or from block to table cell, or whatever you want, which basically meant that we had to separate out the layouting and rendering from the DOM representation. And that's what we did then at that time, again in a new branch in KDE. And we added DOM bindings to the CSS, a simple CSS parser. We did lots of architectural work there in the beginnings of 2000 to get these things working and up to speed. And that's actually one of the only screenshots I could find still from that time. It shows Hebrew and Arabic support in Konqueror at that time using the KHTML engine. And it actually created quite a lot of noise, especially in Israel and in the Arabic countries, because it was the first non-Windows browser, the first browser that wasn't Internet Explorer, that actually supported right to left languages correctly. So we were quite a bit earlier out than Mozilla with this support. So what happened after March 2000? Lots of bug fixing, but the global architecture had mostly stabilized at that point. And in October 2000, KDE 2.0 came out, and that was the first KDE release where we had a Konqueror web browser and where we used KHTML as the rendering engine. Another thing then was later on happening in April 2002, KDE 3.0 came out, and in January 2003, that was the biggest surprise to all of us, that Apple announced to use KHTML and KJS in their Safari web browser. And from there on, we had two things. We had Apple working on their version, us on our version, and we had basically a split situation. And I think from there on, George can take over and tell about how things continued.
Eventually, we got a little mascot for Konqueror. So, what's the difference between Konqueror and WebKit and Safari? What are all these things? You're probably familiar with Safari now. You may not be familiar with Konqueror. KHTML was the original engine, as Lars said, and then Apple eventually took that and made it their own. They made a lot of changes to the engine, and eventually they gave it their own name, WebKit, which was supposed to signify that it was a bundle that was shipped with Mac OS, so it was called the WebKit bundle. I guess you're probably using Safari there right now. So WebKit is the engine inside Safari, and Safari is the browser. And you can use WebKit in other applications. You can embed it as a component in a Mac OS application. Konqueror was our browser in KDE, and it used the KHTML engine, which now is it's a distinctly different engine, although if you look at the architecture and you really look deeply at it, you can see that it's still the same conceptually. It came from the same place. There are other browsers that are also based on the WebKit engine. Most notably at the moment is the Nokia S60 browser, which I have on this device here, and it has a pointer and it lays out full HTML. It works pretty similar, I would say almost identically to maybe Safari 1.2, I believe, is roughly where they split off their code base. So the WebKit engine and the KHTML engine are spreading quite a bit, and there are more browsers that are starting to use this engine. I expect probably in 2007 there will be at least a few more announcements of new browsers using it. And I believe Adobe announced that they were embedding that as the engine inside what it's called Apollo project, yes. So how do we tell these apart? Here are the user agent strings. And it actually points out some unfortunate occurrences at this point. We have the Safari user agent string, which you're probably familiar with. You're looking for it in some of your properties already. And then we have the Nokia user agent string, the one that phone ships. And if you look down at the very end there, it unfortunately has to lie at this point and say that it's Safari, even though it really has nothing to do with Safari other than the fact that it shares Apple WebKit from release 4.1.3. And the reason it has to do that is to be able to render various properties without getting error messages, such as www.yahoo.com. So they get stuck in a bit of a rough situation because statistically, they're never going to show up unless somebody happens to know that ES61 is a Nokia browser, and that's the E-Series 61 model, and there's probably an ES62 in the E-Series 62. They would eventually, I think, like to call this to give it their own name. Maybe write Series 60 mobile browser or something like that. But at the moment, they're in a bit of a bind. And likewise, we are in some of the other browsers in a Qt port of WebKit at the moment. We actually don't have anything in there yet. And I'll show you what that does, what the results are after I'm done the slides. In Konqueror, we have this user agent string. Nobody really looks for this. There may be a few things. Higher menus is one of them. If you've used that, it looks for the Konqueror user agent and does various things, but not too many sites look for it. So we get treated kind of like a third-class citizen as well from the Konqueror engine with the original KHTML. So here's some information on how you can work with the KDE teams, the Apple WebKit teams. I'm not sure if any of you have worked with any of the folks from Apple already. There are various ways. The websites obviously have some information on them. There are mailing lists. There are a few of them mentioned on the WebKit website and as well on the KDE website. KFM Devel and KHTML Devel are two great lists to just ask questions about how Konqueror behaves or what you can do to make sure your site is compatible. And Lars and I, you're still on both of those lists? Yeah, likewise, so am I, and all the other developers. And we're very eager to help you get your site working with our browsers. There are the blogs, of course, where you can get information. And perhaps one of the most useful tools is IRC. The KHTML and WebKit channels on Freenode are great resources. All the developers hang out there, and we're very happy to answer all kinds of questions, anything relating to the engines or the browsers themselves. And in those browsers, especially in WebKit, here's some of the functionality that we have. We've come a long way since the original version. We have CSS 2.1 fully supported now, HTML4, XHTML, full ECMAScript support. In the tip of tree code in WebKit, we have SVG 1.1 support. It's fairly complete. There are still some things that don't work, but it's in quite good shape, and you can view quite a few of the common demos and some of the common sites that are using SVG, not too many yet. We're working on a JavaScript debugger, cross-platform, and we do have full AJAX support, whatever that means to whoever is interpreting what AJAX means. But we do have full XML HTTP request support, and it's getting updated fairly commonly along with the draft spec. You can actually check this out for yourself. You can build WebKit right from the WebKit website. You can download a binary. There's a button right on the main page. And you can also check out the code yourself and build it on a Mac. And as of probably this weekend, you can also build it on Linux and on Windows. And there's still a little bit of work to be done. So there are rough edges, but we will be able to demo it for you here. And you can give it a try. It's the same engine that's going into Safari in the next release of Safari. There's really not much of a difference. We have a Qt4 code base that Lars, myself, several other people have been working on, and that we hope will actually be integrated this weekend into the tree. There are people working on it as we speak, and tomorrow we're going to be working on it as well. There are test applications. So there's a little browser that you can type URLs into and do a little bit of navigation with to see how it works. And building it is literally as simple as this. One command, especially on the Mac. And we're pretty close on Linux and Windows as well. Maybe 2 commands you have to type. All that information will be made available on the website. So where does this all tie together with KDE, and KDE being one of the main user interfaces on Linux? Well, KDE 4 is under development right now. It's our next major release. And we're investigating the possibility of using WebKit inside Konqueror as opposed to our own tree of KHTML. And what that requires is for us to have a K-part. A K-part is our component system. We need a K-part that will embed itself into the Konqueror web browser, or perhaps if we decide to rework the web browser, whatever that new web browser is. Once we have that K-part, we'll actually be able to try out both engines and see which one meets our needs and expectations more. So several of us are convinced that WebKit is the way to go, and I think for content developers that would be a really nice thing because you'll have more of a bug-for-bug compatibility between different platforms. You can test on one platform and it will work almost identically, if not exactly, on the other platforms. And our engine is actually, it's as I said, it's a component, so it's used in different places, and we need to really make sure it's going to meet all the needs. It's used in our mail client as well. It's used in our instant messenger, and all kinds of surprising places it pops up. So now it's time for a demonstration, and this is going to be fun doing it like this. Let's start it out by showing a site you're familiar with running in Safari. So you can see it renders properly. The DHTML works. And here is WebKit running inside Qt. So this is effectively the work we did for Linux port, but we're using Qt. Qt is compatible on, well, it's portable to Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So I decided, why not try to go back to Mac OS with our Qt port. And here we go. The HTML is working and everything. And we have a nice little tabbed browser. So this is what you'll be able to check out and build with one or two commands quite easily starting this weekend, if all goes well. It's a tabbed browser. Network doesn't seem to be working too well at the moment. But anyway, it's a demonstration browser, so I think it's probably going to crash at the moment. But but it's coming along quite nicely. Now, how did we get it to render this page? We're using a Safari user agent string, which is a little bit unfortunate at the moment. So we're losing our browser statistics. To give you an idea of what the current state of KHTML is at the moment, that's what we get in Konqueror, which is really unfortunate because as soon as we use the user agent spoofer, oops, we get this. And it works perfectly. Really unfortunate. There's a little tiny rendering bug there, I guess.
That's one of the tiny things. But
users don't care about that. They really don't. And what I was telling Nate before is that it would be really great at this stage if content developers would start putting the pressure back on the browser developers, saying, it's your bug now, you fix it. Make your browser work. We're not going to block your site or your browser from viewing our site. Firefox is in great shape. IE7 is in great shape. We're in a situation, we're out of this mess of the past where browsers were very unpredictable and the feature sets were really, really sparse and disjoint. Everyone is catching up quite quickly, and it would be great if you could look, at least just to look at the engine, say, is this WebKit based or KHTML based? If it is, maybe they're using one that's 5 versions old, but it's time to upgrade and at least let the browsers view the site instead of blocking it. I've been working on another browser, and there's no way we're going to be spoofing the user agent. So unfortunately, some things are just not going to view in that. We're still... Yes, it's going to be WebKit based. Yeah. So this is unfortunately what users are going to see. And there's no way to circumvent this too, which is even more frustrating to some users.
Yeah. It's always, in some pages, what you get is some kind of warning that's just, there's a button, show me the page anyway, and then, you're fine. But, I mean, in that case, for Yahoo, it says Safari 2.0, but KHTML is basically compatible with the whole site as well. Then, unfortunately, you have no chance of seeing it. I mean, the only way of doing it is either spoofing the user agent or downloading Firefox.
Yeah, and we do a lot of work to make sure that our browser is compatible with the latest versions of all the high-profile sites. We're really those are the things we look at the most, actually, at making sure that they're working.